if I was going to say inflammatory things, I would say that a third of the country probably could be prescribed. If you look at the medical history of the general population, and then you combine it with the rules that have been set forward, a third of the population could be on medical cannabis.
Bringing BC Bud to Britain's medical market. CFO and head strategist at 4C Labs, James Smith, is no stranger to pursuing sizable opportunities. After setting up shop in Guernsey, one of the UK's Channel Islands, and being awarded the island's first licence to grow and export to the UK mainland medical cannabis, he's now in the position of raising enough funds to build the reality he's worked so hard to create. But is Britain ready to embrace medical cannabis?
For those that don't know you, would you want to just do a quick intro to yourself and the work that you're doing at 4C, and we'll kind of go from there?
Certainly. So my name is James Smith. I am Canadian. My last place of residence in Canada was Whistler, British Columbia. I now live in the United Kingdom, and previous to moving to London full-time, I was living on the island of Guernsey. I am one of the co-founders of 4C Labs, which is a Canadian company that is working in the United Kingdom and the island of Guernsey. We have a cultivation license on the island of Guernsey, and we have been approved for a medical clinic in the United Kingdom. And we are working towards, we are waiting on an approval for a specialist license for the importation and distribution of medical cannabis products.
Brilliant. So, I mean, we've sort of spoken before. So I know currently, and this is my understanding of the market here in the UK, we have to import it, even though we produce so much of it, that has to be exported. But by having something on the Channel Islands, does that mean you can then import it into the actual mainland UK market for medicinal cannabis?
Yes, we can. We have been vetted and approved by the Home Office for the export of medical cannabis from Guernsey, under the caveat that we have to, have GMP approval on the product. It has to be tested and has to be fit for consumption. But the UK government has vetted us, but it will technically still require a movement through a customs agency. So while the Guernsey is a Crown Protectorate, there is still separate borders.
Cool.
Yes.
But so currently we can't do that on mainland UK. If someone's growing it in Norfolk, you can't sort of sell it to dispensaries in London or in the rest of the UK. It has to come from abroad. But that, because of the way it's set up in Guernsey, being outside of the kind of, mainland UK, because it's a Channel Island, because of the legal structure, you can actually import it. Is that kind of the caveat there?
Guernsey can create its own laws. And so Guernsey, while the United Kingdom has legalized medical cannabis, it's legal. Most people don't know. They have also made it legal to cultivate it here for medical purposes. The difference is that on Guernsey, they're actually issuing licenses. Well, to be fair, they've only issued one license of 8 applications. We were the only one to receive it for medical purposes, which means high levels of THC above 0.3%. The United Kingdom has issued a license to the best of my knowledge, a number of research and development licenses that will not allow for commercial sale. But I am told, and what I have read, is that one other company has received a commercial license to cultivate by the Home Office. So they will be able to grow. I'm not exactly sure where they are, but they will be able to grow in that location and sell into the United Kingdom's medical cannabis sort of system, as long as they have reached the GMP standards that are required for distribution.
Absolutely. So, you're from Canada. What brought you to the UK, and what was the opportunity that you saw at 4C?
The opportunity that I saw was a very new market with very few patients and very few participants in the market. Guernsey was the only real nation in really Europe that was openly asking us to do this. When we first met with them, they were very supportive from the very beginning. It was a previous government that these rules were being written under. There was some delay. Well, there was quite a delay in establishing the regulatory framework for high THC cultivation. There was a negotiations and work that needed to be done between the Home Office and the states of Guernsey, which also took some time. And then there was the requirement for the Home Office to audit ourselves, our business plan, and our site. So it didn't go exactly as initially proposed, but at the end of the day, it did get done. And so there was the opportunity was, here's a willing government that's agile and has the real estate that we need to do the work that we need to do at a reasonable price. The market side of the equation was, in my estimation, the quality of the cannabis in this country is generally quite poor. If it's not poor, then it probably is very expensive or difficult to find. And I studied the numbers in terms of the potential patient numbers through the various ailments that could be qualify for medical cannabis prescription, and the numbers are quite significant.
What sort of numbers are we talking, just out of interest? I mean, where do you see the scope of the market for medical cannabis?
So the first question you would ask is, I suppose, is what do the regulations allow for? So United Kingdom, the regulations for prescribing medical cannabis fall on a specialist doctor who needs to be registered with the specialist directory. There currently are not that many of them, under 100, probably under 75, perhaps 75 to 100. And the rules are quite straightforward. If a specialist doctor believes that medical cannabis can improve a quality of life for a patient, they're able to prescribe. They have to justify that. Now, outside of those rules are a series of recommendations by various medical bodies. And those medical bodies take a much dimmer view of medical cannabis and its ability to be a medicine and to create efficacy. So they put forward a series of guidelines that make it sound very difficult to get medical cannabis. But the reality is those are guidelines, and it has proven, my suspicions have been proved, in that it seems that the CQC is actually auditing to the rules, which is what they should be doing, because that's what they are. They're the rules. And the guidelines are simply there as guidelines. The doctors I speak with are finding great success with their patients, surprising amounts of success. Many of them are surprised at the quality of life that the patients are reporting. And so to pull back here, what I saw was a market that had poor quality product. There was no ability to grow it practical ability to grow it in the United Kingdom. That has proven true over since I've been here, which has been 3 years now of working in the UK. They've only issued one other license, and the Channel Islands have issued 2. So there is a limited local supply. There is a large market of patients. So back to your original question, I suspect the number that's typically bandied about in the industry is 1.4 million patients. Okay. I think that number is actually much higher. If you start to examine the number of cancer patients, people with sleep disorders in this country, benzodiazepine prescriptions, opioid prescriptions for chronic pain, you start to look at internal bowel disorders, Parkinson's, other neurological disorders where there's efficacy with medical cannabis, could quickly get that number up to 5, 6, 7, 8, 10% of the population, without any.
No, I agree. I mean, so I was going to say, from my own kind of medical cannabis journey, I mean, I had my second call with a doctor yesterday, and it's kind of interesting in that, I mean, for myself, it's to do with kind of mental health, ongoing kind of issues. I mean, from years ago, I mean, I've kind of been on don't get into my story, but, SSRIs for kind of, OCD and things like that for best part of 20 years. And the idea that just the kind of anxiety related issues, I mean, so many people I know diagnosed or rather been to the doctor in various forms, to talk about kind of mental health issues. And the fact that cannabis can be prescribed, medical cannabis can be prescribed for any kind of anxiety related issue, means that, again, pretty much every other person you speak to could benefit from it in that way. Think about those numbers, it's crazy.
So if I was going to say inflammatory things, I would say that a third of the country probably could be prescribed.
Yeah, I mean, I think
if you look at the medical history if you look at the medical history of the general population, and then you combine it with the rules that have been set forward, a third of the population could be on medical cannabis. Will that happen? I very much doubt it.
Why do you doubt that? And what is? I mean, sorry, I just find this kind of thing is there's so many. Why don't more people know about it? I mean, we've kind of touched on that, but what do you think we need to do?
I mean, I could speculate as to the reason why. There's very little economic interest in the growth of medical cannabis as an industry by many powerful industries, the pharmaceutical being the most obvious choice. But you'd also have to look to the alcohol industries, because I think it's fair to state that when a nation starts to go down the path of medical cannabis, the destination of recreational cannabis is somewhere in its future. And what that date is, and that's not for me to speculate on. I'm not in that. I'm not in the recreational cannabis business. I'm in the medical cannabis business because that's what I'm legally allowed to do. But when you start the journey of medical cannabis and the patient numbers grow, if you look at the history of the growth of medical cannabis in North America, began with AIDS patients, then it moved to cancer patients, and then it moved to patients with internal bowel disorders, then it moved to epilepsy, and then it became prescribed for PTSD in often cases law enforcement and armed services veterans. And then it reaches ADHD and mild chronic pain conditions. And once you've reached that once you've incorporated all those different treatments, all those different conditions that can be treated by medical cannabis, you're starting to get into 2 to 4% of your population. And at that point, what we saw in North America is that the destigmatization that occurs when you have 0 patients to when you have 2% of the population being prescribed is that it's not very far off before everybody knows somebody that's been prescribed medical cannabis and is benefiting from it. And the negative stereotypical views of cannabis begin to diminish, and the reality of the support for cannabis as a product that should be taxed and distributed and regulated by the government rather than gangsters becomes very real. So the people who are opposed to, the future will do what they can to delay it as long as possible.
And that's because they've got a vested interest. I mean, again,
of
this
course,
is just me. Yeah, they've got a vested interest in other industries, where the big pharma, tobacco, alcohol.
So who funds the studies in the United Kingdom? Who pays more in advertising dollars to mass media than any other industry? Those are if you look at those, if you ask yourself those questions, you'll realize that there's institutional opposition to the growth of medical cannabis. So why do the British public, are they not aware of it? Because the British mainstream media are not promoting it, or not necessarily promoting it, but the narrative that they have chosen to run with almost as a group from left to right is that cannabis causes psychosis, which is utter nonsense, has never been proven. The studies that have been used as the foundation for the narrative, the mainstream articles that promote this narrative that cannabis causes psychosis, have no scientific merit whatsoever. And those studies are funded by pharmaceutical companies to scientists who have a personal narrative that they wish to exploit. The cases of the incidences of psychosis are very complicated. They cannot be attributed to cannabis. And if it was to be attributed to cannabis, then you have to look at what is in the cannabis. And in this country, the cannabis that is typically sold on the street, skunk or whatever you want to call it, is generally filled with terrible chemicals, mold, plant growth hormones, and is sprayed with antifungal and anti-pest products that are designed for cut flowers, not for human consumption. So we don't even know what's in these flowers, and which is another reason why anybody who's consuming medical cannabis outside of the being prescribed should really consider about moving to medical cannabis prescription and getting their medicine legally rather than from the illicit market. Because you're supporting a very unethical industry. You don't know what you're consuming. It's as expensive, if not more expensive than medical cannabis, and it's illegal. And you're putting yourself in a position where you could go to jail or have a criminal record, or it could at the very least, could impact your employment.
No, I mean, Absolutely. I'm 100% hear what you're saying. And I think there's quite a lot to unpack there, isn't there? I think, again, the stigma for the idea of medical cannabis is still one that I think is still very prevalent here in the UK. And I think, but what would you say to, I mean, other than the kind of illegality, the obtaining street cannabis, what would you say to people who are kind of considering it or not quite sure about, pursuing it as a medical option? What's the kind of, in terms of what you're doing at 4C Labs, obviously the idea that, you're bringing better quality medical cannabis to UK consumers. I mean, how much better? I mean, again, I'm aware that, you've got vested interest in saying, of course, our stuff's the best. I mean, everyone would say that. But what is it about the sort of flower that you're going to be producing that is, that is better than, say, a lot of the other products, because you mentioned about low quality product here in the UK, even through medicinal cannabis as well. What is it that distinguishes what you're going to be providing to?
Okay, so it's a very fair question. Quality is always a quality. It's easy to say that I have quality. It's very difficult to prove it. So what I can tell you, though, I can give you some empirical information. So when you speak to any breeder who really has been working in the industry for more than 2 decades.
Yeah.
Okay. So in Canada, we have many breeders that were licensed under the original Canada medical cannabis prescription laws who have been legally growing cannabis for 20 years.
Yeah.
Practically since 2001.
Over in Canada, there's been...
In Canada, patients were originally given the capacity to grow their own medicine. So many of these legacy growers who have been growing for 10 to 20 years will tell you a few simple things. The quality of the end quality product, the quality at the end of the day is going to be determined by a number of factors. The most important factor, 70%, would be the genetics of the plant. Mm-hmm. Another 20% would be your substrate and your feeding, and 10% would be grower skill. That most breeders will tell you that that's how it works. And so the quality of genetics is very important. So when we don't call our head grower the master grower, because he's not the master grower, he's the breeder. He has been breeding for well over 15 years. He has been working with a compassionate cancer club in Vancouver, where they only dispense to cancer patients. It is the lowest priced cannabis, I believe, in British Columbia. It's a nonprofit organization. And our breeder has been supplying them with product for over 15 years. He has the top selling flower in the shop for daytime pain and anxiety. Mm-hmm. So why is his product better? Well, his genetics are better. He has been actively pursuing how to grow the best plant for the patients. And so he has a track record of actually doing that. There's very few people, I don't think there's a person in the United Kingdom that can claim that they've grown cannabis professionally for cancer patients. Certainly they have not bred and continued to breed to work on specific conditions. His terpene profiles are going to be 5 times the volume of a typical water-grown, large room-grown, irrigated product, which is typically what is being sold in the United Kingdom right now. Is hydroponically grown. It's grown in a very large room, so probably typically of somewhere in the neighborhood of 100,000 square feet, and which means there's lots of different microclimates, and it's not, you do not have the environmental controls to bring out the best of the genetics of the plant. Mm-hmm. It's not a criticism of the style, it's a fact. Yeah. And so based around my personal experience with Rob's plants and his flower, I can say that as a patient in the United Kingdom who has consumed the medicines that are available here, that I can consume 1/4 to 1/5 of his flower and receive the same efficacy as I get from the product that's currently available in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, wow, I mean, that is so interesting that there's so many different, I mean, I think the perception here, I mean, the legacy market here, I mean.
Sorry, could I just want to add a thing. That does not, there's something very important that I didn't.
No, please.
the efficacy is not based on the level of THC. The THC percentage on the genetics that his top seller is somewhere between 16 and 17%.
Okay, so it's kind of on the lowish side. Yeah,
THC is only one determinant in the product quality. There's many other cannabinoids that need to be present, and there needs to be terpenes present. Without terpenes and without minor cannabinoids, the same effect will not be achieved. Now, I state that, but I can't prove it. But we're going to prove it.
Right.
There is overwhelming anecdotal evidence on the importance of terpene presence and minor cannabinoid presence to create a more balanced, higher quality product that creates better efficacy and requires lower levels of titration.
I mean,
Sorry about it.
No, not at all. I mean, again, that's the talking about perceptions and things like that. I mean, people from outside of the sort of industry, will have one view of cannabis as like, it gets you high. That's what it's for. That's the kind of recreational side of things. When you start to talk about medical cannabis and, like you say, all the different terpenes, all the different cannabinoids and the way that they interact, the entourage effects, all of that, creates that's the kind of medicinal part. That's how all of that comes together. And that, has its own impact, like you say, has its own efficacy. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about the kind of overall effect on, different conditions. And I think that's something that's kind of easy to lose sight of when you're you don't know about it when you're coming into the sector for the first time, as a patient, as a consumer, as whatever you are. And it's kind of, the more you understand about that, the more you can start to think of it as medicine. And I think sometimes that education piece is currently missing, particularly here in the UK. And I think part of what I'm trying to do is help inform people about all of those different things and understand that, what that impact means and what it means and how it can benefit people. And I think, again, I understand through what you're doing with the CIC as well, that's part of your kind of, I'm say, advocacy work in a way. How do you see that? And what's the kind of important role that being involved in the CIC? And that's, Cannabis Industry Council, isn't it?
So it's
here in the UK. Yeah.
Founded by Dr. Mike Barnes. I believe we were the first company to sign up. I've been hoping that a national advocacy organization would be created for medical cannabis as well as CBD and hemp. There is a lot of cross interest between the various organizations in terms of regulatory framework. And so when Mike put this together, I would say probably the discussion started about a year ago and it finally came together in early summer. We became immediately involved. What's important to me about the CIC is it creates a vehicle for lobbying government for regulatory changes. It gives us the opportunity to meet and work with our other colleagues in the space, which I think is very important in a nascent industry, is that we get on with each other and we support each other and we communicate with each other and we exchange ideas and information to help us all be better. There is a lot of cake to be eaten in this industry, and I think that playing well together is the best path to all of us enjoying the fruits of the industry. So I felt that a national organization could help contribute to that, which I believe it is. And almost most importantly, I felt that we needed a non-corporate body working with patient advocacy groups, working with doctors, as well as other members of the industry, such as lawyers and accountants, and that together, collectively, we would have a better chance of success at promoting the existence and benefits of medical cannabis in the United Kingdom. So for my part, as co-chair of the Prescription Cannabis Subcommittee, my fellow co-chair is Dr. Sunil Arora. It's sort of an ideal situation. I have one of the original prescribing doctors in the United Kingdom who is very talented and very supportive of medical cannabis as a way to create higher quality of life. Working together with him on that subcommittee, we're able to make decisions that are not just driven by industry concern, but they're driven by patient concern. And so I feel that when you have three different voices at a table, you're going to make better decisions than if it's just one voice. So together, what we've come to the conclusion that we've drawn is that the British public are not aware of medical cannabis as even being available. First problem. Second problem is they don't understand that it's available for a wide array of conditions, which are at this point primarily being prescribed for pain, anxiety, and sleep. And then beyond that, we believe that we need to look at things like adjusting regulations, such as bringing cannabis to a Schedule 3 product, so it's easier to do studies on that GPs can prescribe.
Mm-hmm. That's what needs to happen in the UK in order for GPs rather than specialist doctors.
There's a lot of regulatory issues that are not being addressed. For example, something as simple as there is no medical cannabis agency in the UK. It doesn't exist as a regulatory body under any organization. So the body that is in charge of regulating the current medical cannabis system in terms of importation and exportation of goods is the Home Office, which has a Department of Firearms and Drug Enforcement, which is an odd entity to be managing a medical cannabis industry. Absolutely. Now, that's where they've stuck us right now. And so it was to help lobby towards creating an agency that just deals with nothing other than medical cannabis. It should be under health. That's what it is. That's where it naturally falls. So there's a lot of work to be done in terms of public awareness, as well as adjusting government regulations to make a higher functioning industry, to help people get off of opioids, benzos, Z drugs, and to help also shift the public who are currently using medical cannabis illicitly into a legal market. One of the challenges is that it's expensive to get a prescription. The British public are used to having the NHS cover a portion of, if not all of their medicines. Having said that, if you're currently self-medicating with cannabis, you're paying for it anyways. So what we would like you to do is we'd like you to pay for it, but we'd like you to purchase it from a safe, legal, ethical operator. And
again, but that's an interesting point in itself, because again, I have medical cannabis, I receive it, I get it through the post, which seems crazy, through from a dispensary. And if the law enforcement agency came knocking, I would have absolutely no recourse to sort of say, I have no medical card. There's nothing like that formally exists. I know there are things like CannaCard, but again, there's nothing to sort of prove. So how do we kind of address that sort of issue, do you think?
I think your mentioning of CanCard makes a lot of sense, right? So at this point, CanCard, to myself anyways, I'm just speaking from a personal point of view, not a company or CIC. CanCard seems to makes a lot of sense. But I think that there's some things that we need to do. We need to get it nationally recognized. There needs to be a registry of medical cannabis patients where you upload your prescription, and it is a card that is supported by government agencies because it's confusing for law enforcement. It's not fair. It's not fair to law enforcement to put it on their shoulders to decide whether or not somebody is a legitimate medical cannabis patient. That's not fair. So if we can provide a legal, approved, government, maybe it's not government issued, but government approved system that allows for medical cannabis patient registry, that allows people to identify themselves as patients, whether it's going into a nightclub or whether it's going into a weekend festival or whether it's simply going to work. There should be better protection for the patients.
Absolutely.
That's all part and parcel of the destigmatization and the normalization of medical cannabis and acceptance of it as a medicine.
What do you think we can learn from how things have worked in North America? I mean, some of the institutions for the government from provincial, from different states that you know of, how have they tackled it, and what could the UK adopt in terms of best practice from the way that they've been able to kind of destigmatize, legitimize all of those sorts of things?
If you want my dream list of regulatory changes that should occur, is GPs should be able to prescribe. This is the only place in the world where GPs cannot prescribe medical cannabis, where medical cannabis is legal. Every other jurisdiction allows GPs to prescribe. That's number one. Get it down to a Schedule 3 so we can start to conduct studies. Further to that, I would want the MHRA to accept and understand that multi-compound molecular products like medical cannabis don't fit into restricted clinical trial frameworks, despite the fact that real world evidence, which was how all medicines were studied and approved prior to 1981, that real world evidence information can be used towards MHRA approved initial studies. I think we need to, I think the MHRA needs to understand that this isn't going anywhere, that there's patient efficacy, that there's a distinct quality of life improvement by literally thousands of studies. I also would suggest that the MHRA needs to release its demand that the only studies that they will review are ones that are conducted in the United Kingdom. I think that in 2022, that is preposterous, that there's a great deal of information that's been done in North America. Mm-hmm. I would also suggest that the NHS has a role to play in that children with epilepsy should not be paying for their own medicine. Cancer patients should not be paying for their own medicine. I don't expect the NHS to allow or pay for the prescription of flower. That's not a realistic expectation. I don't think as an industry we should anticipate that. But I do believe as an industry, we have a role to play, which is to lower the cost of medicine. It currently is too expensive. The cost of oils is outrageous. And that will change because there's a great number of equatorial and southern hemisphere producers that are coming on with GMP, good manufacturing approved processes and products. Over the next 12 to 24 months, you'll see the prices go down. So as an industry, that's on us to execute. But outside of government, I believe that if a cancer patient can only manage their nausea with medical cannabis oil, they should be getting that paid for by the NHS.
This sounds like there's a lot to happen before that can become a reality, though. I mean, from an institutional perspective.
As a member of the industry, I believe that we need to make better efforts at lowering the cost of these goods. And I think if we can work with the NHS and show them that we are going to do what we can to drive the prices down to a much lower price while still being able to create a successful business model, that we have a better chance for working with the NHS to some level of success. So
how are you guys going to do that at 4C? That's kind of interesting. And where are you at right now in your production in Guernsey? You're not up and running yet. You're still on the edge of building the framework for what you need. Is that right in terms of the infrastructure? I'm sorry.
So we have a capital raise that we're valuing ourselves between sort of 35 and 45 million pounds. We are in the process of raising 10 to 15 million pounds. The use of those funds will go towards the construction of our facility in Guernsey, the establishment of our online clinic requires, you can imagine, a great deal of money in terms of IT infrastructure. And same thing for the pharmacy specialist license that we hope to, we anticipate we will get within the next 3 to 4 months. That's how we'll commence operations. We will also, we'll be cultivating in Guernsey. We'll be cultivating what we refer to as a craft product, which will be our breeder's genetics. He will move to the island of Guernsey. He's currently training his head grower right now in Canada and conducting experiments on 4 different lights to see how those lights are reacting with his genetics that he knows and that patients love. So once the funds are raised, we'll start to build we have the building already in Guernsey, and we've reclad a portion of it. We're pouring a foundation through the balance of the facility, and then once we receive the capital raise, we will build out the actual facility and then equip it with all of the HVAC and lights and labs and that's required to commence our audit grow. So in order to be approved for good manufacturing practices standards, as well as good agricultural collection practices, you need to run 3 crops. You need to you have to have all of your IT as well as your standard operating procedures, stress test and adhered to through that 3 crop cycle. You have to be able to prove to the authorities that you've done the same thing all the time to achieve certain results. And then we need to engage in some stability tests with the plants. While we are doing that, we will be bringing in third-party product. That will be a lower-priced line, a premium line is what we're referring to it as. It will come, that flower will come from Canada, potentially South Africa as well. Maybe even as far away as New Zealand. We don't know exactly yet, but we do have an agreement with a Canadian company that can help supply. Well, they could supply the entire market right now. They have so much production. I'm happy with, I've vetted their product. I'm happy with it. They're currently going through stability studies to get those products registered under GMP. And I expect that I will be able to bring that product line to market, which is, and just to back up, our product line is going to consist of 5 different flowers, which will be a balanced product that will be somewhere around 9.9 in terms of THC to CBD ratio. And then there'll be a night and day flowers, and night will have a medium strength, which will be 15 to 20% THC, and strong would be over 20%. Same thing for daytime, medium 15 to 20, strong 20 plus. So 5 different flowers, 5 different genetics, 5 different, that could address potentially different conditions. So we will have that product line available by November 1st. We hope that all depends on
this year. Yeah.
So that depends on Health Canada, that depends on the Home Office, that depends on external factors that we can't control, but that's the objective.
So when do you hope to be, when do you hope to have the craft products and the facility up and running?
Within 18 months of commencement of building the facility. It'll take about 6 months to build the facility out, another 12 months to get through the audit process and the stabilization process. It could be faster, but those are the numbers that I like to look at. We will also be having a similar day and night balanced oil line, where we'll have a daytime oil and we'll have a nighttime oil as well as oil. And that will be delivered in a vape pen as well as a tincture product with an eye to the future on soft gel tablets.
And you're looking at each product as like being, designed for certain conditions. For it can be like a pain management, the kind of anxiety management, and the kind of is that the idea? Yeah.
The terminology that typically gets bandied about is sativa, indica.
Yep.
Breeders hate those words. They prefer to discuss things in sort of narrow leaf or broad leaf. And reality is to find a pure sativa or a pure indica is basically impossible. Everything has been crossbred, and both sort of the broad spectrum of genetics in cannabis can be interbred to create specific conditions. So the Falcon 9, which is the best-selling daytime sort of anti-anxiety pain relief at the BC Compassion Club, that's one type of product. Another genetic, for example, Fatso, which if anybody wants to go to Leafy and look at or Death Bubba Kush. So Fatso is a great sleeping genetic from my personal experience, and that's what generally most people consider it. And could be because it has very high garlic terpenes. I'm not exactly sure, but we're going to find out. And Bubba Kush, another indica dominant varietal that comes from the Sea to Sky corridor in British Columbia, it's considered by many people to have one of the best pain relief profiles. So, you have different genetics that can do different things. We believe, right? And this is currently what the existing model of the market is doing. There are the major suppliers, or all the suppliers in the country are all saying nighttime or daytime. We believe that we need to do a better job of that through color code, through creating a medium as well as strong varietals. I also look to the future and see lighter varietals of THC levels of sub 15%. And I see also varietals that will go above 25%. A Death Bubba Kush could hit 28%. And if we find that patient efficacy and is strong for pain relief, then we would add another line, add another flower that would be higher in its THC levels. So we're looking to create, but we're starting off with keeping it simple so that it's easy to understand for the patients. Medical cannabis made simple is our slogan for a reason. We want the patients to be able to understand it. Want the doctors to be able to understand it. And the reality is that many of the patients that will be coming to us will already be familiar with medical cannabis, and they'll understand titration, and they'll be looking for specific genetics that that work with their conditions. And that will happen in time. We'll find that patients will be drawn towards a certain thing. You could say, well, it's daytime pain relief, but it may work for a particular patient's endocannabinoid system, that it's actually works very well for nighttime relief and it helps them go to sleep.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's interesting itself, because I feel like, I mean, having been born and bred here in the UK and always lived here, the idea that we have actually some choice over the medications that we're prescribed by the doctor seems, I mean, I guess it's very different in North America, particularly in the US, where there's a lot more kind of commercialism around kind of, big pharma and things like that. But again, that just seems interesting to me, that would be an option. And I think, again, for the good of kind of medicine as well, giving people options and presenting them with, different varieties and, but it just shows how much education there needs to still be, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first step is that the nation needs to realize that medical cannabis is available to them. I would suspect that
100%.
99.9% of the population do not know. 1 out of 1,000 people will know that medical cannabis is legal in this country. And of that one person, half of them will believe that it's only restricted to usage for perhaps children with epilepsy or maybe even cancer patients. But beyond that, they don't know that it's being...
CBD is a kind of, you see that in like Lloyd's Pharmacy now. You go and you say CBD patches and it's like, oh, and I say, people, that's cannabis, and they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, CBD. So
it is one component of cannabis. That's another more complicated conversation, because much of that's labeled as CBD in this country comes from an isolate, and it's been well proven that isolates on their own have very little efficacy unless consumed in very large quantities. So, but that's another conversation.
For sure.
The first thing that we need to do is we really need to get the message out that it works for a wide array of conditions, and talk to your doctor. So and then once we've got that sort of under control, then we can start to work on the promotion of the more complicated ideas that there's literally, I think at last count, there's 3,000 different identified cannabis genetics, all doing similar yet slightly different things, and having different effects on different people. Your ECS is not the same as my ECS. What may work for you may not work exactly the same for me. So it's a much more phytopharma based medicine is complicated. But one of the great things about cannabis is that you're not going to die on it. If you happen to over titrate slightly, there's no overdosing, there's no death in recorded history. So it's a very safe medicine, yet it can offer great relief from many symptoms. Absolutely.
I think it's just, I mean, obviously you're doing your kind of advocacy work and working with CIC and lobbying government. But what else do you think? How else can we get that message out there? I mean, that medical cannabis is available in the UK. I mean, for me, it's a case of, being actively interested in it, looking online. And again, I found a patient list on Reddit, for crying out loud. That's the level of kind of obscurity we're still currently at. We need to kind of get that more out into the open. How do you see that happening?
I see that it's going to take a body like the CIC through a coordinated and professional public relations campaign to make the British public aware. So I don't know what your audience is like, but if there's any, wealthy private individuals out there who want to contribute to a public relations campaign that is dedicated to promoting the fact that medical cannabis is legal and available for a wide variety of conditions, please talk to your doctor. We will gladly take your money at the CIC. I have a budget goal of £130,000 to raise. I have verbal commitments of £50,000 without even having it officially launched at this point. We still have to do some administrative work to create the infrastructure to take the funds. And I am in the process of speaking with a number of different public relations firms, some of them very, very high powered, very professional, with very impressive directors and very influential people in them, and who are very excited to work with us, very excited. They see a great opportunity to do something. And so that's the only way we're going to get it done. The industry and patients have got to do it together. And that, again, is one of the great things about the CIC is it's a combination of industry, patients, and practitioners coming together to promote a common interest.
And it sounds like it has to come from practice. It needs to come from GPs as well. They need to be the ones who are the target of these kind of campaigns as well, to broaden their understanding too, right?
Getting into a larger understanding of cannabis inside the medical community is absolutely imperative. The endocannabinoid system is just as important as your nervous system, except it's never studied in medical schools. There is no training on medical cannabis. The entire history of cannabis as medicine has been completely whitewashed from any kind of medical education. Now, again, who's funding the studies? Who's funding all of the events that are being used, that are being put on at these institutions that are training the doctors? This isn't very complicated. Who has the most financial interest in preventing the growth of medical cannabis at this point in time?
Yeah, no, absolutely. 100% understand where you're coming from there. It's
why we have this level of ignorance in the medical community is because they have been told that it's not medicine. They have been told that it doesn't have the efficacy of pharmaceutical products. And I think that the public is kind of tired of the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, in North America, as well as here, you have a massive opioid crisis. You have a benzodiazepine crisis. You have a Z drug crisis. You have millions of children who are now taking effectively amphetamines to manage their ADHD and who are using large quantities of speed to act as a study assist.
And because it's prescribed by doctors, or mainstream doctors, or, GPs, or, people who are well respected, then it's almost permissible because it's got that veneer of legitimacy. Seems to be the only thing separating that from the adoption of medical cannabis.
Right. And how did Oxycontin work out? I think I can say with some certainty that if Pfizer wanted to, I shouldn't say Pfizer, a large international pharmaceutical company wanted to proceed with legitimate, serious medical cannabis cultivation and production, with the knowledge that the legacy growers who have been growing cannabis for patients for decades now, if they could find a way to do that and to do it correctly in a methodology that's environmentally friendly, that is also has the capacity to produce the best results for the patient, then I suspect that things would be much easier in terms of regulatory environment. But that's not the case, not yet. I suspect that the hard work is going to be left up to dreamers and visionaries in the industry to fight through that sort of societal ignorance and get it out on a level playing field. Now, I would suggest that one of the histories of medical cannabis in Canada that I felt was a great tipping point, and I always like to share this with anybody who asks me, is what tipped medical cannabis in Canada to get it to the point where recreational cannabis was no longer scary. And I would suggest that the adoption of medical cannabis as medicine for military and law enforcement veterans, what I refer to as the LEAF community, law enforcement and armed forces, the LEAF community began to turn to medical cannabis when they returned from Afghanistan. Afghanistan, for whatever reason, I'm not a military strategist, has seemed to have produced very high levels of PTSD. That just the nature of that war has created a massive amount of PTSD in the veterans. And the veterans of Canada have found great relief and efficacy and specific sort of genetics that are typically running around in the mid-teens and have certain terpene profiles. Blue Dream would be considered a classic PTSD genetic. And their medicine is covered by the government of Canada. The government of Canada, under Stephen Harper, a very conservative prime minister, allowed that to happen. And if he can do that, then Boris Johnson can do that. And I would suggest that we need to look to, this can't be an industry of hippies and stoners. It needs to be an industry of science and advocacy and working with groups that have historically had an issue with cannabis, like law enforcement or the armed forces, conservative organizations. Once you have law enforcement veterans on your side and can say to the world, this is medicine, I think that's when you will find you will start to find real destigmatization, normalization, and an older conservative members of society will start to look at it as medicine, and hopefully will start to use it for treatment of things like their nausea from cancer treatment, unfortunately.
No, I mean, all's very, very, very interesting points, James. Thank you. I'm just going to sort of wrap things up a little bit now, but I'm just as a sort of final question. Do you think, or how long, do you think it's a question of time before we get recreational legalization here in the UK? And if so, how long? I mean, for all the reasons you've kind of pointed out, it sounds like still quite a lot would need to happen for that. But do you think there will come a time?
I would say it's inevitable that cannabis will be recreational throughout all of Europe and the Western world in a matter of time. What that date is, I don't know. I don't really concern myself with it because it's not my business. Technically, like I am not in the business of growing recreational cannabis, nor does 4C Labs aspire to do so. We are quite content to work in this space, and we have a lot of ideas around creating bespoke medicines that are drawn from data that we can acquire through the use of specific genetics, seeking out the best pain relief profiles, the best sleep profiles. This is what concerns 4C Labs. So I don't know, but yes, it will become legal someday, but I believe that there's a great deal of work to be done before then. And I think that if the British people in general can start to accept and utilize cannabis as medicine in larger percentages, that if I was going to make a prediction, that once you get to 2% of the population, 3% of the population getting medical cannabis as medicine prescribed, then you will have probably conditions that would start to look favorable towards creating a recreational framework.
Absolutely. But again, it sounds like there's a lot to do. But in terms of what 4C Labs is doing, it certainly sounds like, in terms of, you've got the right idea about things. And I think, going into the medicinal market and providing that medicine and actually trying to change the dialogue on what cannabis is, for medical patients and potentially far off the kind of recreational, that acceptance piece needs to happen. And it starts with organizations and, efforts like the ones you're making to start that ball rolling. But it still feels like, despite all of these great efforts, there's quite a lot to overcome. But again, this is all part and parcel of where we're at here in the UK, and I think in Europe too. So, but no, really, really good to speak to you. Thank you. Thanks for your time, James. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Dave.